Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, boulders the size of cars blocking roads and a busted bridge to nowhere. It's the long way round or off-road for some South Island towns, still cut off by yesterday's foul weather. The Waitaki District Mayor joins us live. Taumarunui is caught in the slow lane on the internet highway after its broadband cable claps out. How far off is a fix? Well, let's ask Chorus. More hospitals shut out visitors and hopefully COVID too. We'll have renters on mouldy old cold houses that are costing top dollar and a waterway warning for dog owners, plus Kev and Bev and their wheelchair e-bike, an invention driven by love and some seriously sore muscles.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. The government is being told the big storm in Canterbury and Otago yesterday should be a wake-up call. The Ashburton Mayor says the regions need urgent help to combat the threat of floods. Neil Brown says farmland was flooded in his district and there was damage to the roading network. He says many locals feared a repeat of last year's major floods.
A report was done 6 months ago and sent to government about co-funding this sort of work. We haven't heard back from the government as yet. So the report's done. Now's the time for some action and get that gravel out of the river, move those stop banks if necessary. Let's get the work done so we don't have to repeat this.
Hundreds of cubic metres of rock has been dumped into the washout on Lake Ohau Road in Waitaki District in the hope of restoring access to the area. Several hundred people are trapped at Lake Ohau Village after the only road in was washed out by severe weather. Almost 1,400 cubic metres of water per second is still washing through the Waitaki River. Boil water notices remain in place for the Ote Matata and O Marama water supplies. The Prime Minister says she'll keep her mask on in future when taking group photographs. Jacinda Ardern has come under fire for sharing a photo of herself with more than 100 young people at Parliament, just one of whom was wearing a mask. Ms Ardern says the photographer requested they briefly remove their face coverings, but she won't do so again.
In the future, I'll just have to more often politely decline. Because, I accept the point that we are role models. We will, from time to time, make mistakes, but we are ultimately still role models.
Just last week, the government issued a plea to New Zealand to increase their mask wearing to help slow down the second wave of Omicron. The first 6 months of this year were the second warmest on record. The National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research says in the period from January to June, temperatures were 1.2 degrees Celsius above the long-term average. Meteorologist Ben Knoll says the rise is concerning.
The trend is not our friend. And while it does, seem nice to say, step into the ocean and not have to worry about wearing a wetsuit in the middle of summer. Think of the mass bleaching of the sea sponges that we saw in Fiordland. So those are some of the impacts from climate change.
Ben Knoll says while there's been extreme rain, flooding and some snow down south, much of the North Island has seen very warm temperatures this winter. Europe is currently going through a heatwave. Britain has just recorded its first ever 40 degrees Celsius temperature. Greymouth police are asking for victims of historic sexual abuse to come forward after a local man admitted charges of abuse he carried out over 30 years. They say 87-year-old Alan William Walton, also known as Skeeter, today pleaded guilty to charges of multiple historical sexual offences against young boys and teenage youths. The offences occurred on the West Coast from the late 1950s through to the 1980s. Police say the known victims are linked through several sports clubs that Walton was involved with, including West Coast Junior Rugby League clubs and the Greymouth Memorial Swimming Baths. They'd like to speak to anyone with information of similar offending by Alan Walton. New Zealand's internet domain provider says the people of Taumarunui should not accept being disconnected from the internet. There's no certainty when the 2-day problem with the area's fibre cable will be fixed. Interim Chief Executive at Internet NZ, Andrew Cushion, says residents shouldn't accept cuts to water or electricity and the internet should be treated with the same priority.
I think it's an essential part now of how we live our modern lives here in New Zealand. And yes, We do risk writing it off as just a frivolity and a way of being entertained. Right now, I think the good people of Taumarunui would be argued differently.
Andrew Cushion says the lockdowns provided a timely reminder of just how imperative the internet is in modern society. To sport, and Motorsport won't be held any longer at Pukekohe Park Raceway. The multi-purpose venue, which is owned by the county's racing club, will become solely a horse racing facility. Opened in 1963, Pukekohe has hosted some of Motorsport's greats, including Bruce McLaren, Sterling Moss, Jackie Stewart and Graham Hill. 80-year-old Kenny Smith has raced 64 seasons on the circuit and says it'll be missed.
Because of the age and where it was and how people grew up around it, it's memories and you never forget them. Yeah, new circuits are good, but Pukekohe is something special. It's just been there so long.
Motor racing will officially stop at Pukekohe next April. Auckland sprinter Portia Bing has become the first New Zealander to advance to the women's 400-metre hurdles semi-finals at a World Champs. She's also the first New Zealand athlete in any hurdles event to make it beyond the heats at a global championship for 54 years. Appearing at her third World Champs in Eugene, Oregon, Bing finished 5th in Heat 2, just missing one of the first 4 automatic qualification spots, but her time was good enough to advance as next fastest. Meanwhile, Britain's Jack Whiteman has won the men's 1500-metre gold, becoming the first British man to win the title since Steve Cram in 1983. And former All Blacks hooker Kevin Mialamu has been forced to pull out of the Fight for Life boxing event at the last minute. A routine medical checkup yesterday revealed Mialamu has an irregular heartbeat. He was due to fight former Warriors and Kiwi Leagues player Wairangi Kopu in the main event. That's the news.
Shut up, Kim, said one texter. Stop interrupting. Barry, Guy and Corin know what they're talking about as opposed to you. Shut up, Corin, said another.
Yeah.
Let Barry, Guy talk. And someone very perceptive points out that Corin and Barry talked over me, and they've noticed this before. However, this may be completely justified given that I don't know what I'm talking about.
The finest in presentation. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Whanganui, also Coromandel. Showers, some thunderstorms are possible today, easing tomorrow. For Bay of Plenty and Taupo, rain is easing to a few showers this afternoon and then clearing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain today and then showers. Southerlies rising to gale tomorrow. From Taihape to Wellington, including the Wairarapa, occasional rain. Snow may affect higher roads tomorrow. Severe southwesterly gales in Wellington and Wairarapa tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, occasional rain with thunderstorms possible for Bulla and northwest Tasman today, becoming fine tomorrow. For Marlborough and Canterbury, occasional rain, heavy for a time overnight with snow above 300 metres, gradually easing to a few coastal showers tomorrow with gale southwesterlies. Fiordland, Southland and Otago, a few showers, mainly south of Dunedin, fine about the fjords. And for Kohu, the Chatham Islands, periods of rain from tonight. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll update you with the latest news headlines and traffic at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Some South Island communities are still cut off tonight and a solution to a washed-out bridge is days away. Holidaymakers in Lake Ohau have been told to hunker down while the council patches up the only way in and out of the village. As well as that, there are massive boulders blocking a state highway, the link from Nelson to the west coast. Waka Kotahi says the road needs to be closed for at least 2 days, while the rock face on the side of the highway is secured. And in Ashburton, the Mayor wants more government action to help communities like his get through and prevent these major weather events. All this as the Prime Minister speaks to mayors today, some of whom are dealing with an increase in severe weather events. Associate Local Government Minister Kieran McAnulty says those affected at the moment are getting support.
So it's all under control. It hasn't had to be brought up to ministerial level, but the NEM is continuing to liaise with them. And I've spoken to each of the mayors. There's about 6 mayors affected. I've spoken to all of them today and they're pretty happy with the support they're getting.
We'll have more on what the Prime Minister said to mayors today in a moment, but first here's Rachel Graham with the towns bearing the brunt of the wild weather.
The floodwaters washed out the sole bridge providing access to Lake Ohau, and the Waitaki District Council says it hopes to have access restored by the weekend. Waitaki Mayor Gary Kircher says Lake Ohau is a very popular place at this time of year, with at least 150 visitors staying at the lodge, plus others staying in Airbnbs. It's also a village with no shops.
The emergency management team are looking at how they can get some supplies into Lake Ohau village, mainly for those who are staying there longer than they were planning to and don't have enough food for that.
This morning, the owner of the Ohau Lodge, Mike Nielsen, led 19 four-wheel drives across a paddock for people who needed to leave.
We took a convoy of guests who had finished their stay here, and we did it in a convoy and went across the farm paddocks. I was just trying to keep it in order so they didn't go wandering off and didn't quite follow the right route and then get lost and stuck.
Ohau resident Hugh Spears says locals tend to be pretty self-sufficient, but he's still desperate for the bridge to reopen. He's waiting for a delivery of precious jibboard, needed after the massive fire in the village.
We're just on a rebuild program at the moment after the devastating fires of 2020. And yeah, so we're waiting now. We've had floods and fires. We just don't need locusts. That's hopefully that's the next thing that's not going to happen.
Access to Omarama was also cut off yesterday due to flooding, but was restored again this morning. At the Omarama Top 10 Holiday Park, one of the owners, Erwin Baibor, says they are just starting to assess the extent of the damage, with at least 12 units damaged.
We have now at the moment the fire brigade here pumping the rest of the water away from us, as it just does not go anywhere. Roads are all completely destroyed at our park, with units are completely destroyed. Yeah, there's just a whole lot happening.
The downpour also brought down massive boulders, some the size of a car, along State Highway 6 west of Murchison. The road is closed and people will need to take a detour via State Highway 1 via Kaikoura to get from Nelson to Canterbury. The storm has also caused problems in Taumarunui, leaving muddy conditions in the region's main and backup water sources. The council says they may need to put on a city-wide boil water notice if people don't conserve water. Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown says it was primarily farmland flooded in his area yesterday, and the fragile roading network also took a beating. He says it was an anxious day for the region, with many fearful of a repeat of the major floods a year ago. He says it should be a wake-up call to central government that there needs to be urgent action.
A report was done 6 months ago and sent to government about co-funding this sort of work. We haven't heard back from the government as yet, so the report's done. Now's the time for some action and get that gravel out of the river, move those stop banks if necessary. Let's get the work done so we don't have to repeat this.
Mr Brown says this is not work that the local ratepayers can afford to do alone, and they will need help from central government.
Jacinda Ardern has told mayors while things are tough now and will be for a while, there's cause for hope and optimism.
Infrastructure, climate, the future shape of local government itself, increasing weather events, the ongoing pandemic, community well-being. But for what it's worth, you are not alone. In central government, we feel that weight too. I know I certainly do. And I very much see it as my job and our job to ensure that you are supported, and that when it's a joint challenge, that you have a partner in us, central government. After all, a problem shared is meant to be a problem halved, and goodness knows we could do with a bit of problem subtraction.
Te Piramia Jacinda Ardern, and as you just heard, the Lake Ohau village is still cut off after the only bridge access was washed out in the storm yesterday. So what's the plan? Well, joining us now is Waitaki District Mayor Gary Kircher. Kia ora, Gary.
Kia ora.
So what's the plan for filling up the hole with the two bits of the bridge and the gaping gap there?
Yeah, well, there definitely is a plan. Yesterday, roading staff managed to get some rock and so forth located to that area. Today, waters are receded enough that they've been able to start filling the rather large gap with some of the base rock, at least for the moment, and they hope over the next day or 2 days that they'll get the necessary gravel and so on there to at least get a temporary access through there. So a good step forward today.
So Gary, how big is that gap?
I'm not 100% sure, to be fair. I think it's sort of a 30-metre gap. It is reasonably large. It's the bridge area itself is okay. It was a relatively small creek, but the floodwaters have swollen it to quite a big stream, and it's all the approach that's being washed out. So anyway, they're getting on with it, and hopefully access will be re-established.
So Gary,
in the next day.
Am I understanding this right? So it's the access onto the bridge. You are simply going to build it up with rocks, put some gravel over it, and level it up with the existing bridge so that then you just drive straight on until you get a more permanent fix?
Yeah, that's the idea. They don't want to be redoing work too much, but they want to be able to establish a good enough base, and they should have got a good start to that today. But yeah, it's a matter of just getting enough so that vehicles can get in and out, at least light vehicles, and it'll be checked next week for, if it's robust enough for some of the heavy vehicles that do go in and out of that area, particularly with a lot of building going on.
Absolutely. Someone's waiting for Jib, we hear, over that bridge, which will probably take a truck. So in the meantime, you think it'll just be cars? Yeah, I've got to get back to that person and give them the bad news that they might just need to postpone that delivery for a couple of days. How do you know that the rest of the bridge is okay? What have you done to check that? Engineers have been looking at it and making sure that everything's right. I mean, it's withstood the force of the water as far as the main bridge structure, but it's just the approach washed out that needs to be rebuilt back up. And that's if that didn't happen, chances are the whole bridge might have been taken out. But it's given way and allowed the water to get flowing through at least. So that's the positive side of it. So Gary, how many holidaymakers have you still got on what is effectively the wrong side of the bridge? There'll be somewhere between 150 and 200. A lot of people are there for the skiing and, of course, school holidays. So the Lake Ohau Lodge has been full, and quite a few of the holiday homes and Airbnbs and so on in the village itself would have had people staying there. So there was a small convoy that was able to get out today across the farmland. It's quite fragile land, but it allowed those who most needed to get out to evacuate. So presumably, Gary, sorry to interrupt, you'd need a particular type of vehicle to go the back way as such. So realistically, for those people who are just in your average sedan who are cut off by the bridge, how long do you reckon they're going to have to wait to get out? Should be able to be out by the weekend. So fingers crossed and everything going well. And there's, the rainfall has definitely dropped today, and hopefully that forecast is accurate, that there's not going to be too much rain at all for the next couple of days. Best of luck, Gary. Thank you for your time. That is the Waitaki District Mayor, Gary Kircher there. It is 17 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Last night, we brought you a story about compliance with healthy home standards lagging more than 2 years after the law took effect. All boarding houses and private landlords now need to ensure their rental properties meet healthy homes standards within 90 days of any new or renewed tenancies. After running our story, we heard from a lot of renters who say their places still aren't up to scratch. So we called some of them.
Hi, my name is Danny. I'm a renter in Auckland. I have moved twice in the last 3 weeks. The house that I moved from was cold, damp, and our landlord refused to fix things. Our next house that we moved to had windows that couldn't close on moving day, at least one window in every room. The shower wasn't working. The back room was so mouldy that when I tried to clean it, I made a hole in the ceiling. However, when we tried to raise these issues with our property manager, he was extremely unprofessional and insisted that it wasn't his fault that our house was unlivable. It has been a nightmare, honestly. I've been doing the property manager's job for him, and now I'm going to Tenancy Tribunal for the 4th time.
Hi, I'm a renter in Wellington, and I've been in the rental for nearly 7 months. Myself and my flatmates have had to chase up every single thing regarding Healthy Homes compliance, from the compliance statement to getting the installation of the heating and extraction unit. Every single thing has required multiple phone calls and emails with the property manager. At this point, we're now looking at moving and then going to tenancy tribunal. We gave a bit of leeway due to COVID, but now, 7 months in, we're sick of it.
I am a student. I'm at the University of Auckland, and I am a renter. The situation I was living in last year was a pretty chilly flat. We didn't have any central heating, no heat pump, and then no oil heater as well. There was mould on things in our bedrooms and on the walls, and took this to our property manager and said, hey, look, is there anything we can do to get a bit of heating? We're pretty cold. And the property manager said, you're going to have to go to your landlord to do that. Now, our landlord lives overseas. We had no way of getting in touch with them. I'm pretty sure that's the job of the property manager to sort that out. So I gave the tenancy tribunal a ring. They said, look, there's not much you can do unless you have the time to sort of go through quite a long procedure. There's this thing about students not respecting landlord's properties, but it's difficult to respect a property when the landlord doesn't respect your basic right to live in a warm and dry and healthy home. We know there's this sort of unspoken thing of the blacklist, which means we might not get proper references for flatting for the next year.
A lot of issues there. So our reporter Louise Tanuth put these concerns to the president of the Property Investors Federation, Andrew King.
Look, from a landlord's point of view, there's no fear-mongering. No one is saying if you move, you'll find it hard. Any tenant can actually just look on Trade Me or any of the rental sites to find out what is available. There's no fear-mongering going on. I don't understand that.
Are property investors, are landlords making the efforts now, or are they sitting on their hands until 2024?
No, the majority of our members are saying that they're already putting them in place. And in fact, a lot of them already were compliant beforehand. We've always told our members or educated our members that it's good to have a nice, warm, dry home that tenants want to live in. And that's they're likely to stay in there longer, and so it's much better for them as well. So, yeah, a lot of them are already compliant, and the others are really just getting it in before 2024.
So we've had a lot of feedback from renters, and they've really been struggling with some of their landlords meeting those healthy homes requirements, but they've had to stay in those rentals because they haven't been able to move anywhere else. They're staying in there on a long-term contract, pretty helpless. What do you make of some of those situations that people are in?
Well, from a landlord's point of view, it's really expensive to comply with some of these things. Like heat pumps are very expensive. Even a ventilation system for the bathroom and the kitchen, they can cost $1,500 each. Heat pumps could be somewhere around $4,000 or $5,000. So it is quite an expenditure to do it. If the tenants are saying that they're willing to pay a little bit more to recompense for those costs, then that would be one thing. So it'll be interesting to find out if the tenants were actually willing to pay a little bit more in rent to have that improvement from their property.
But with respect, do you not think landlords should be footing the bill, considering they're the ones that own the house?
Rental property is a business, and the cost has to be met somehow. So with like any other business, like when the cost of food has gone up, it's the end user who pays that. When petrol goes up, it's the end user that pays that. When bank fees go up, the end user pays for it. And rental property is no different. Even with state houses, the cost of these things is going up, and it's the taxpayer who pays for it. So somebody will end up paying for it. And with any consumer item, it's the end user, and in this case, that's the tenant.
And that was Louise Tanuth speaking to the president of the Property Investors Federation, Andrew King. It's 22 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. Really interested in your thoughts on that interview with the Property Investors Federation. There's a cost to upgrading properties, Andrew King says. Who should carry the cost of having a warm, dry home? And are people, not paying enough rent to expect that? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines. Ane e iwi mina pitipiti kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. There'll be no radical shake-up of local government unless councils request it. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has spoken to mayors at the Local Government New Zealand conference in Palmerston North. The government's pushing through a suite of contentious reforms, overhauling water management, the RMA and city planning. But Ms Ardern says there'll be no reform of local government or governance unless councils want it. Ashburton's mayor says yesterday's damaging storm shows that the region needs urgent help from the government. The clean-up is underway in parts of Otago and Canterbury, but Lake Ohau residents are still cut off and detours are in place because of slips on state highways. Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown says a report was sent to central government 6 months ago seeking co-funding to move stop banks, but there's been no response. The Court of Appeal has ruled in favour of a protest group that objected to bottling consents in Canterbury. The Canterbury Regional Council granted Cloud Ocean Water and Rapaki Natural Resources consents for their industrial Belfast sites in 2017. It was upheld by the High Court, but Aotearoa Water Action went to the Court of Appeal, which has ruled the council doesn't have the ability to grant resource consent for bottling water. And a state funeral will be held in Japan for the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The 67-year-old was fatally shot earlier this month on the campaign trail. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, nothing to report on the main routes at the moment in the main centres. We'll keep an eye on the traffic for you, and we'll also update you on the latest headlines at about 5:40.
Kia ora rā e ho. A North Island town relegated to the online slow lane after its fibre cable was damaged may be waiting a little longer for broadband and 21st century life to be fully restored. The faulty chorus cable has left much of Taumaranui's population of 4,707 without the internet. A slump in the road near Tikowiti on Monday damaged the line, cutting off ATMs and FPOS machines. Chorus company spokesman Steve Pettigrew is on the line. Kia ora, Steve. Have you got the hamster moving in the wheel yet?
Kia ora. I've got some good news to share, thankfully. Within the last few moments, we're getting notifications that services are now back up and restoring in and around the area. So after the damage you mentioned in your update, we found a second fault on the cable. That's been worked on throughout the day. And residents will find, and residents and businesses will find that their services will be restoring now as we speak.
Yeah, so you're using the word restoring rather than restored. So what does that mean? Is it, do people come on one at a time, or how long are you expecting it to take?
It will happen very quickly. Each of the fibres that is spliced will serve a certain number of customers, and as each of those are spliced up, they'll see their services coming back up. So typically, we'll see hundreds of customers coming back up online at one time.
Okay, I'm no engineer, so let's talk about this in terms that I can understand. When you talk about them being spliced together, is the cable sort of like a rope with multiple strands, and you're saying that as each of those individual strands is reconnected, more people come online?
So exactly that. The fibre cable we're talking about is a solid cable, but inside of that are 48 strands of fibre. Each of those need to be, from where the damage is, you need to cut through those cables and then rejoin them with an undamaged piece of fibre cable. That second fault took us. We needed 185 metres of new cable to replace where the damage had taken place, and then it's splicing back those fibres at both ends. So it's 48 fibres on one end, 48 fibres on the other end.
What does this say about resilience? Because I don't know, it seems a little bit hokey that we get a dip in the road and all of a sudden much of a town is cut off from a modern day service that is now a central part of our life?
There's a number of things that happen with the resilience side onto that. So number one is networks in themselves can be quite good. So the fact that it's a town has been impacted by this, it could have been significantly worse if there weren't other resilience measures in and around that.
Steve, that's no consolation. It could have been worse. That's no consolation to people. I mean, while I've been talking to you, another Steve has got in touch via text and he wants me to ask you this. Why is there only one fibre route? Why don't you have a loop so that something like this, there's a backup and it doesn't happen?
There are multiple fibre loops around the country for bringing traffic in and around New Zealand.
But not around Taumarunui?
But, within each of those areas, there is a point where you can't actually run different individual fibres just to support individual groups or individual communities onto that side. There's a limit to how much you can build that resilience into the network. And there is a decision for people to take themselves as whether they have a backup service, for example, over mobile broadband, or the ability to use satellite services if they're business critical and really need to make sure that they can keep continuity of service.
But that's kind of like saying, hey, Chorus might not be reliable, so make sure you hire a second person to do the job that you hired them to do.
I think it's important to note with the weather today and the impact of the rain and weather and other kind of climatic. This was a reasonable sizable slip of land to cause this damage.
So how is the cable protected? Because that's the other question, right? Does it run under the road, alongside the road? Because what we're told is there was a dip in the road structure, and that's caused some damage. Is there adequate protection around the cable?
It was a 30 centimetre or so dip into that road that caused the first bit of damage, and the second piece, I'm not sure. I haven't seen the images from that damage and that point. As I say, it's an armoured cable. It is buried beneath the road surface. But in this instance, it was a sizable enough slip with concrete and tarmac that caused damage to the fibres within that cable.
Do you reckon broadband is an essential service these days?
I completely believe broadband to be an essential service, yes. OK,
so did you fix it fast enough?
I've got to say that this one's been a tougher repair to do than most, so and certainly on the behalf of Chorus, happy to apologise to all those residents and businesses affected. In the time I've worked for Chorus, we've tended to be able to get to there faster. This one is going to have some exceptional circumstances around challenges in terms of getting it sorted in a more timely fashion.
Appreciate you coming on and explaining that, Steve. That's Steve Pettigrew, who's from Chorus, and he's saying that service to Taumarunui is restoring as we speak, and it should happen pretty quickly. Let us know. 2101 on the text. Let's go to the business news now. I think it's time for Giles Beckford to join us, isn't it, from down in Wellington? Oh, Giles Dexter, rather. I'm getting my two Giles mixed up here. So the Prime Minister has attempted to ease Mayor's concerns about Three Waters today as she spoke at the local government conference in Palmerston North. Our political reporter, Giles Dexter, joins us from there now. OK, Giles, we're talking about Jacinda Ardern, not about business news. So what did Jacinda have to say to the mayors?
Yeah, I thought, oh gosh, I'm being absolutely thrown in that. I don't know the first thing about business, but she essentially gave a state of play speech talking about what it's like to be in government right now. That's central government and local government. Jacinda Ardern said it's grim, it's tough, and there's a lot on everyone's plates. So perhaps not the most uplifting speech a Prime Minister has ever given. But Jacinda Ardern did acknowledge that these councils are facing the speed and scale on so many fronts with these Three Waters reforms that it is a uniquely challenging time for them, particularly those in public-facing roles. She acknowledged the abuse and the heckling that councillors and mayors have been getting from their constituents, and that some are facing being voted out of office just because they're not outwardly rejecting the Three Waters reform. She did try to sort of calm those fears. It didn't exactly help this conference, though. There was a sizable protest of about 30 to 40 people outside trying to stop people from getting in to listen to the speech.
So, Giles, what was the actual significance of the Prime Minister turning up there today to speak?
Well, it's just because it's such a contentious policy, but also such a key policy that the government wants to get through under any cost. So Jacinda Ardern was here to basically say, hi, we're here, we're listening to you, we're here to help, we're here to fund. But it didn't exactly go down too well while we were preparing for this cross. The mayor of Matamata, Piako, walked out. He said there was absolutely nothing she could say that would change his mind, and that he didn't want to stick around and listen to what he said was BS. That was my translation of what he said. I'm not going to repeat it. So she is ultimately here trying to tell councillors that even though it is a difficult year, it is an election year, that the government is listening to them. Submissions to the first part of the bill do close on Friday, and Jacinda Ardern isn't ruling out implementing some of these things that councils are suggesting.
And so the money that's been pledged by the government to help councils get through the transition, I mean, how's that going to be divvied up?
Well, they've just announced a $44 million fund, which equals about $350,000 per council for the next 12 months. That's because the new Associate Government Minister, Kieran McAnulty, he's been driving around the country trying to talk to every single council, and he says they've told him their main concern is how stretched they're feeling, particularly those rural councils as they battle this new transition. There's more hours being put in, lower staffing, so that money's going to go forward to that. But I was talking to the Dunedin Mayor, Aaron Hawkins, and he was saying the money is all well and good, but it's still not going to address how stretched his staff are feeling.
Thanks, Giles. That's Giles Dexter, political reporter, joining us there, who's been listening to the Prime Minister's speech. It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia mau tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And now it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa inai. Ko Nicholas Poynton joins me in the studio. Kia ora, Nicholas. Green shoots starting to emerge in the hotel sector, you say. Tell me more.
Yeah, look, I'm not breaking any news when I say that the hotel sector has been hammered over the past couple of years with the closure of borders, but there have been some positive signs emerging with the incremental opening of the border. There's been some overseas visitors coming back to New Zealand, and also the return of corporate travellers. And we've got some figures to sort of back this up from the property research firm Colliers International, and it shows that average daily room rates in 4 out of the 5 main centres in New Zealand are now back above pre-pandemic levels. There's also occupancy rates are picking up, as is revenue per average room. They're still falling below pre-pandemic levels, but we have seen some improvement over the past 3 months, and the outlook for the sector is looking quite positive given the fact that borders, we're going to have further restrictions sort of coming off at the end of this month. That's going to be a bit of a boon for Queenstown, given the fact that it's a winter destination, hoping to attract some overseas visitors there. But there are some reports of solid forward bookings for the rest of the country. That sort of points to a pretty good looking summer in the months ahead. But all that outlook, that positivity, it's not without its challenges, because the people in the hotel industry and the tourism industry here, they can probably look to what's been seen in the Northern Hemisphere over the past couple of months, where they've been absolutely slammed by, and they were unprepared for the level of demand that they've been seen over there, both in airports and airlines, as well as hotels and things like that. So it's going to be a real test for the sector in the months ahead about, are they able to scale up? And by that we mean having enough bodies to do the work you need them to do.
Yeah, because we had CEOs changing sheets in Queenstown at one point.
But as we all know, this is one of the toughest times it's ever been to find workers for your business.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to watch. Okay, let's talk about Stranger Things. Are we saying that one series has, buoyed Netflix through this patch where, subscribers were bailing out at 90 to the dozen?
Yeah, well, look, we won't necessarily say it saved Netflix, but Netflix did report that they lost 1 million subscribers over the past 3 months. However, that's half than what was forecast. The market was expecting them to lose 2 million subscribers, and the finger's sort of been pointed at Stranger Things. That's the hit TV show on the platform. In a good way,
pointed at them.
Yeah, pointed at them. Look, pointed at that show. It's one of the shows on the platform that's resonated the most with viewers. It's up there with The Queen's Gambit and Squid Game. I can't believe I forgot about that. These absolutely classic shows that became real pop icons, resonated with people all around the world. But the story about the erosion of subscribers for Netflix, it seems to be a continuing one. They really sort of spooked the market earlier this year. Their share price fell off a cliff when they revealed that their decade-long run of subscriber growth fell for the first time, had come to an end. And they've been steadily losing viewers because of the end of lockdowns. People aren't spending as much time at home. There's subscriber password sharing. I suppose there's a few of us that are quite guilty of that. And there's also becoming a more crowded and competitive marketplace. You're seeing the rise of the Amazon Primes. You've got Disney Plus, you've got Hulu in America, as well as HBO Max. Locally, we have players like Neon as well. So with that, the outlook for the streaming sector looks to be challenging. It seems like a lot of these companies are going to be trying to steal each other's lunch, competing for the same sort of customer base. Netflix, the way they're responding is going to be offering cheaper subscriptions, trying to go for maybe lower income customers. That's by putting adverts on the platform. Not sure how people will actually feel about that, but hey, they've got to try something. Some analysts, though, they still have faith in the streaming sector. They say, look at the demographic changes. We now have a generation of young people who never really watch cable TV. This is what they're used to. As they get older, hopefully they're going to start paying for subscriptions themselves, maybe not leeching off their parents.
Let's take a whiz around the markets.
The NZX top 50 up 36 points to 11,199. The dollar trading at 62.7 US cents, 90.6 Australian and 52.1 pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton, not to be mistaken for any of the Gileses. As disruptive storms and major flooding events become more common, councils are looking at how to prepare for the impact of a changing climate. In Nelson, more than 4,000 properties are likely to be affected by 1.5 metres of sea level rise in the next 100 years. The councils now are asking the community what features in the city they most want to protect. Samantha G has more.
The Wood, a desirable low-lying suburb close to Nelson city centre, is facing a future that will see more coastal inundation and river flooding. It's one of many places in Nelson that will be affected by sea level rise. Residents want to know what the options are to protect their homes and how long they've got.
As across all our low-lying areas around New Zealand, we're going to have this flood sandwich, which is rising sea levels, more coastal flooding and wave overtopping at one end of a suburb, and at the other end of the suburb, increased river flooding from increased intensive rainfall.
That's environmental engineer Rob Bell, who says New Zealanders need to prepare for more frequent and extreme weather events. He says while there's uncertainty about the pace of sea level rise, it's safe to say it's only moving in one direction.
There's a misconception that, this is going to be very costly and can we afford it, which is partly true. But the other side of the coin is, if we're going to continue to have this constant flooding events or erosion events or river flooding events, they're going to be quite costly to mop up, clean up, to rebuild.
The council's climate change manager Rachel Pemberton says they want to hear from the community. It's holding a series of workshops to find out what people value and what they want to protect.
People are talking a lot about recreational values, so how they love living near Taumarunui beach, for example, and they want to be able to continue having access to the beach, and also people want to protect their coastal views.
The council will then use the feedback to develop specific adaptation measures for different areas.
We're likely to prioritise different parts, so areas that are more vulnerable, such as Manako and the Wood, are likely to be prioritised for looking at adaptation options. And we're also waiting for the Climate Adaptation Act and the National Adaptation Plan to be released by central government, and that will give us an idea of answers to key questions such as who's going to pay for the costs of adaptation.
Stormwater and flood protection engineer Toby Kay says the region is exposed to coastal hazards in different ways.
Some of the coastline is very much exposed to wave run-up, wave swell, for instance, along Rocks Road, Wakefield Quay, and then parts of Taumarunui. The other areas are much more sheltered. So you have, for instance, coastal inundation, but it's not with the wave run-up. For instance, in the CBD, you have tidal inflows through the stormwater network.
He says there will be trade-offs between different options.
The options need to be identified and prioritised based on what the communities value around the city, and those values may be different in different areas. Some people may put more emphasis on protection against flooding, and others may put more emphasis on protecting the environment.
It's a key issue this coastal area is facing, with big decisions needing to be made.
It is 19 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In Homai o Whakaaro, we're already getting a landslide of feedback on the issue of, wet, damp, mouldy houses and the rent you pay. Do keep it coming. You can text us about that or anything else that's on your mind from the program today, 2101, or you can tweet us at checkpointrnz. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines. Ko Evi Anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The Prime Minister says it's the wrong time to reduce COVID isolation rules, with more than 10,000 daily cases today. Some businesses are calling for a relaxation of the 7-day isolation for infected people or their household contacts. Jacinda Ardern says the government is doing what it can to reduce the COVID caseload. Efforts to restore access to an area of the Waitaki district are underway, with hundreds of cubic metres of rock being dumped into a washout on Lake Ohau Road. Several hundred people are trapped at Lake Ohau village after the only road in was washed out by severe weather. A Niwa meteorologist says an increase in temperature across the country is a concerning impact of climate change. From January to June, temperatures were 1.2 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, the second warmest period since records began. Niwa meteorologist Ben Knoll warns there could be more record warm temperatures through to the end of the year. And the country's main internet provider says being disconnected from the internet is as serious as a power or water cut. A fault with Taumarunui Taumararunui's fibre cable has left the town without internet for 2 days, and it's not known when it will be restored. The interim chief executive at Internet New Zealand, Andrew Cushion, says the internet powers so much of everyday life that it's now difficult to cope without it. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, no unusual delays or breakdowns to report on the main routes. Meanwhile, in Tasman, State Highway 6 at Murchison is still closed due to a rockfall. They say rockfall, but if you've seen the pics, what they really mean is a rock the size of a small moon. It's not expected to open up that road for a couple of days. I'll have the latest news and weather for you at 6.
Yep, that rock is a doozy, Evie. I've had a look at the picture. Right, let's get to some of your feedback now. And boy, there's a lot of it. This is off the back of Louise Tanuth speaking to the Property Investors Federation President Andrew King about mouldy cold houses. The Andrew man for the rental property owners does not represent me as a landlord or land person. What a disgrace he is. Look after your tenants, that listener says. Carol's got in touch to say tenants need to complain to the Tenancy Tribunal. They need to raise the issue of health and safety. Alex Macmillan, Associate Professor from Dunedin, says healthy housing isn't a consumer commodity as implied by the property investors. It is a human right. Bull dust, this person says. That's what I think of the property investors' claims. Heat pumps, extractor fans, etc. cost nothing compared with the rent they are taking. They're greedy. I'm a landlord with 2 properties. One house has rental of $350 a week. I can still afford to keep standards up. Jay from Auckland asks, why is the cost never taken from the business margin? It always seems to be higher price rents, never lower tax-free returns. And this one from a landlord who says, last year I had a healthy homes assessment of my house. As a result, I installed a heat pump and put a moisture barrier under the house. I wouldn't have dreamed of asking tenants for extra rent. It should be on me as a landlord to make sure my house is warm so my tenants don't get sick because of the state of the house they live in. Shame on the Property Investors Association. If a landlord doesn't have a house up to standard, they shouldn't be renting it out. Do keep it coming, 2101 via text. Doors are shutting and curtains closing at hospital wards around the Motu, with visitors being told to stay away. There are 744 people in hospital with COVID, and health workers want to stop transmission on the wards. Sam Ollie reports.
Winter illnesses infecting households in Whangarei.
There is a lot around, a heck of a lot of it around. Flu and COVID.
Continually short-staffed because of illness, because of COVID or winter flus. Just the strains of it out there.
All my kids got sick with the flu and they were off school for about a week with high temps and stuff, and it felt worse than COVID. Like they were jumping around with the COVID that they had. And there's tummy bugs going around, ear infections, sore throats, the works.
The city's hospital has not allowed visitors onto the orthopaedic ward for more than a week because of a COVID outbreak. Now nearby Dargaville hospitals had an outbreak on its single inpatient ward. It's also shut to visitors for the first time in the COVID-19 pandemic. Te Tai Tokero Associate Chief Medical Officer Dr. Lucille Wilkinson says initially there was 1 infected patient in Dargaville. The next day there were 4, and it's likely they caught the virus on the ward.
Some patients don't notice their symptoms so much, so it's not always easy to sort of pick up the person who has COVID, who then might give it to someone else. But we're basically, what we always do when we see this is we make sure that we're checking patients for symptoms every day.
In Invercargill, the entire hospital is out of bounds for visitors other than support people for maternity and paediatric patients, and the odd exception on compassionate grounds. General Manager Simon Donlevy says there are 160 beds and 21 inpatients have COVID.
It's most likely that visitors have brought in infections, but there is some evidence to say that some patients have passed it on to other patients. All our staff wear masks, good quality N95 masks, so it's very unlikely that any patient would have caught it from one of our staff.
Starting today in Canterbury, children under 16 can't visit hospitals, and there's a strict no mask, no entry policy. The incident management controller Becky Hickmott says it was hard to ensure visiting children had well-fitted masks.
And this is predominantly about their ability to wear a mask, appropriate mask to be able to visit.
Nationally, case rates have increased about 4.5% in the past week, while there was a 28% jump last week in the hospitalisation rate. University of Canterbury Professor Michael Plank says the infected age groups are concerning too.
We're seeing more older people getting infected with COVID now, particularly in the over 70s. The case rates are very high, more than double what they were at the height of the March peak.
The government has warned COVID hospitalisations could peak at 1,200 this winter, but there was some good news today. The number of infected people in hospital dropped by 44, down from 788 yesterday.
Around 200 dogs have died from toxic algae in the past decade here in Aotearoa. Found in waterways, the algae is one of the most toxic natural compounds in the world. But while the risk to our four-legged friends is well documented, the human impact isn't as widely known. Neva Chittick reports.
This is Springlands Reserve in Hallswell, Christchurch. The pond behind me had cyanobacteria found in it back in April, and there are still council signs up today warning that the toxic algae is still present. A dog owner I spoke to earlier, who was walking around the pond, said she'd never seen any dogs in it and said she would never let her dog go in. Environment Canterbury Water Quality Team Leader Shirley Hayward says just a teaspoonful of cyanobacteria is enough to kill a dog.
The challenge with dogs is that they love the water, many of them do, but also some of these cyanobacteria that produce toxins also produce odours that dogs are very attracted to, and so they're actually drawn to some of these scums and they like to have a lick and a taste, and that's why they're particularly vulnerable.
If a dog is poisoned, disorientation or unusual behaviour, vomiting, diarrhoea or seizures are telltale signs. Sally Corey from the Veterinarian Association says it's important owners act quickly.
The best thing to do is to contact their vets as soon as possible. If their dogs are symptomatic or they are worried, just get them in the car, start driving to their closest vet clinic and just have someone to call ahead so that they can be prepared.
Cyanobacteria appears as sticky, black or dark brown mats on riverbeds or as an olive green scum across lakes and ponds. The river variety tends to be more toxic, but both can cause serious illness in pets and people. Susie Wood is a freshwater scientist at the Cawthorne Institute and says eating the algae causes the worst symptoms, but touching or swimming in it can have an effect too.
You can experience some skin irritation, so people will have rashes and in some instances also respiratory problems. So there's kind of two different types of toxins, ones which impact you when you touch them or you have a lot of contact with them, and then the other ones which are more likely to be fatal, other ones which affect us if we ingest them.
Dr Wood says there's also a lack of awareness around cyanobacteria effects on people, so cases tend to go unreported.
Often some of the symptoms that if you have just a mild exposure to the toxin or the algae, it can cause sort of gastroenteritis, stomach problems. The first thing you think about is not necessarily algae, it might be what you had for lunch or were you exposed to some other bacteria on the way to the lake or the river.
Cyanobacteria is regulated in drinking water standards and most councils routinely test for it at popular parks and swimming spots, notifying people through signage or online updates. Shirley Hayward says blooms are more common in summer, but it's highly unpredictable and climate change may make it a year-round issue.
The situation can change very quickly and that makes it very difficult for monitoring, and that one day it might look fine and then the next day a bloom may have formed. So it can happen that quickly under the right conditions, and it can happen anywhere, in any waterway.
Miss Hayward says people should always check waterways before they or their dog go swimming or have a drink. The golden rule, if in doubt, keep out.
Next, an invention driven by love and some very tired, aching legs. Kevin Harvey, who's 79, got to tinkering on a design for an e-bike wheelchair because it was a monster effort to push his wife in her chair up the hilly terrain along New Plymouth's coastal walkway. He thought biking with her up front would be easier. Also, Bev, who is 89 and has dementia, can see the ocean that she loves.
Well, if you ever had pushed the wheelchair along a lot, and then you got an upward slope, it's really tough. And, well, that happened quite a few times. We were right on the walkway here where we are, and I'd take my wife down there and take her along. And when you go right down when the tide's in, it's really nice. Like the tide's right against where the walkway is.
So, for people who haven't seen this thing, it kind of looks like a bike at the back with half of a wheelchair on the front, or how would you describe it?
No, it's a full fold-up wheelchair in the front, but you can't fold it up now. And the electric bike's got the front stem altered, so it's not facing forward, but facing more plumb or back. And then the forks are put back in again, and the forks go down and connect to a bottom rail going across between the two parts that stick out on the wheelchair, and it hits the back as well. I can undo a wing nut and pull a pin out, and it's a wheelchair by itself.
What does Bev think of your creation?
Oh, she loves it in the way that she's got other people to say good day to all the time. Bev used to be real shy once. Now, with dementia, she's the opposite. And she's always saying, have a good walk, have a good ride, and I enjoy it myself, actually.
So you know how they say that necessity is the mother of all invention? This sounds like love and some very sore muscles is what created this.
Yeah, I think it's if you need something for yourself, you'll have a go.
So you like to tinker in the shed?
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah.
I got to do all the housework now and that sort of thing, so don't get much time in it.
So does Bev love the sea, does she? The ocean?
Well, we can't understand anybody not living by the sea. Gives you a sense of direction where you are. You don't need GPS.
How often do you try and get out with Bev on the bike and the wheelchair?
Yeah, every 2 hours. Whenever it's fine and no wind. Yeah.
How fast can you go on that thing, Kevin?
Well, now that it's geared down in the front, you wouldn't do more than 20.
Oh, that's a clip. 20 k's is a bit of a clip, Kevin.
Bev doesn't like going very fast. She moans.
Does she let you know?
Oh, yeah. And she doesn't like bumps.
Do you get the hard word, Kevin?
Yeah, the bumps affect the spine and all that.
Hey, she must be a pretty special lady for you to have invented this for her. How long have you been married for?
40 years, I think I just told someone. Yeah.
40 years?
40.
What's your background, Kevin? You know, were you an engineer or,
No,
what's your background?
When I was young, I was a farmer, and then I worked at New Plymouth Power Station building it, and I think I was the only labourer graduated to a carpenter because I used to teach housing carpenters the construction side of things. And then I built some flats without even knowing how to do it.
You sound pretty handy, Kevin.
Oh, yeah, I can do anything.
Do the locals know you? When you go whizzing past on your bike with Bev in the front, she's saying hi to everyone. Do they think, oh, there goes Bev and Kev?
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
Hey, so is Bev got a seatbelt? Is she buckled in the front seat there?
Yeah, I have a seatbelt fitted to around her, and I'm told I've got to put a helmet on.
Kev, the inventor there. The checkered flag is getting set to wave for the final time at a beloved New Zealand motor racing circuit. Pukekohe Park Raceway, south of Auckland, will be solely used for horse racing from April next year. Clay Wilson reports.
In the various workshops, racing cars are prepared for the first race in the Tasman Series to be held at Pukekohe near Auckland. Bruce McLaren and his team work on their Coopers, fitted with 2.5-litre Climax engines. These cars and many others have just arrived from England and Australia, and together with the New Zealand cars will provide motor racing fans with as fine a spectacle as they'll see anywhere.
Over the past 6 decades,
Pukekohe Raceway has hosted many of motorsport's greatest moments on Kiwi soil. But that all comes to an end in April next year, when the circuit closes to allow the venue to be exclusively used for horse racing. Former Supercars star Greg Murphy, who won multiple times at the track, says the sad news is still sinking in.
It's tough to think that it's not going to be there anymore. We've got a huge population of motorsport enthusiasts and petrol heads in this country, and Pukekohe is synonymous with the sport, and I think a lot of people are going to be really saddened by the fact they're not going to be able to go there, sit on the hill and watch motorsport.
Sentiments echoed by veteran New Zealand driver Kenny Smith. The 80-year-old, who's still racing, contested the very first meet held at Pukekohe in 1963 and won 2 of his 3 New Zealand Grand Prix titles there. Smith says the track hosted some of the world's greatest drivers in those early years.
Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Sterling Moss, Jack Brown, Bruce McLaren, Amon Hill, Surtees. I mean, you can just keep going on with these names, and they're all nice people. They're all very friendly, and they'd mix with you, talk with you, and it was just great fun.
Its history also not lost on long-time motorsport commentator and analyst Bob McMurray.
It is a fascinating track to run on, race on, to watch cars on as well. Almost every corner has got some incident or some memory or some whatever that people will attach to it. Simply having the train line running along the back straight.
As much as he loves it though, McMurray says the track's time probably came several years ago.
It has been pretty average for many years. The facilities are not good for motor racing. It's just a shame that it's been let to go to rack and ruin, but it's been exactly the same since pretty much it was built. So, a shame for motor racing anyway, because it is an iconic track.
And an iconic track that's produced plenty of iconic moments, from those star-studded New Zealand Grand Prix days to more recent times and the thrills of the Australian Supercars series. Supercars say they're intent on continuing to race in New Zealand, and Greg Murphy says the Hampton Downs track looms as Pukekohe's natural successor.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Koivi Ashton tēnei. The Prime Minister is promising not to radically shake up local government in future unless councils themselves call for change. Jacinda Ardern made the commitment in a speech to mayors at the Local Government New Zealand conference in Palmerston North. The government has launched a review of the sector's future, but Ms Ardern says she sees councils leading the way.
It will not be the policy of any government I lead to embark on another substantial reform of local government or governance unless it is sought and unless there is a broad consensus amongst local government about the need for it and the direction of change.
The government is currently pushing through a suite of contentious reforms overhauling water management, the RMA and city planning. The Prime Minister will keep her mask on for group photographs in future. Jacinda Ardern is under fire for sharing a photo of herself with more than 100 young people at Parliament. Just one person was wearing a mask. Ms Ardern says the photographer asked the group to briefly remove their face coverings, but she says that she'll politely decline in the future. She says MPs make mistakes from time to time, but should act as role models. Last week, the government issued a plea for New Zealanders to increase mask wearing to help slow down the second wave of Omicron. Hospitals around the country are closing wards to visitors in an effort to stop the transmission of COVID-19. The 160-bed Southland Hospital in Invercargill has 21 infected patients and has been closed to visitors for more than a week. Wards in Dargaville and Whangarei hospitals are also closed. Te Taitokerau Associate Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Lucille Wilkinson, says some patients don't notice their symptoms.
So it's not always easy to sort of pick up the person who has COVID, who then might give it to someone else. But we're basically, what we always do when we see this is we make sure that we're checking patients for symptoms every day.
The government's warning that the number of people hospitalised with COVID could peak at 1,200 this winter. The Waitaki District Mayor says those stuck in Lake Ohau village will hopefully be out by the weekend. The village was cut off after the only bridge access was washed out in yesterday's storm. Gary Kirker says there are around 150 to 200 holidaymakers on the wrong side of the bridge.
A lot of people there for the skiing and, of course, school holidays, so the Lake Ohau Lodge has been full, and quite a few of the holiday homes and Airbnbs and so on in the village itself.
Gary Kirker says a small convoy of people managed to escape the village earlier today. The Lindis Pass between Taris and Omarama reopens tonight. While most of the state highways around the South Island have now reopened, State Highway 6 near Murchison is closed until at least Friday due to a slip. Waka Kotahi warns that surface flooding is still an issue on roads around the South Island. A meteorologist is warning there could be more record warm temperatures in New Zealand throughout the rest of the year. From January to June, temperatures were 1.2 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, the second warmest since records began. NIWA meteorologist Ben Knoll says it's a concerning impact of climate change. While there's also been extreme rainfall in parts of the country, Ben Knoll says much of the North Island has seen very warm temperatures this winter. The UN is warning the frequency of severe heatwaves, like the one currently being seen in Europe, will increase over time. The UK has recorded temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius for the first time, while devastating wildfires are spreading in several countries. The BBC's Azadeh Moshiri has more.
Across Europe, wildfires have continued to rip through the continent's forests. The damage is clear in France. The country has seen tens of thousands of hectares burned and tens of thousands of people evacuated. North of Athens in Greece, green hills were covered in smoke as authorities reported 39 wildfires in just 24 hours. Heat waves are happening more frequently, becoming more severe and causing temperatures some countries have never seen before.
The government believes an overseas investor visa scheme hasn't been adding value to New Zealand's economy. Changes are being introduced to investor visa settings, with 2 existing pathways being scrapped and replaced by a new category. The new system means applicants will have to invest at least $15 million over 3 years, or just $5 million if money is put directly into a New Zealand business. The Minister for Economic and Regional Development, Stuart Nash, says the majority of offshore investment over the past few years has been into shares and bonds. A marketing expert says the New Zealand toy giant Zuru could be doing more damage to its brand by trying to identify former employees who criticised the company. Court documents in the US show Zuru plans to sue former employees who anonymously wrote 6 negative reviews of the company on the platform Glassdoor. Associate Professor of Marketing at Auckland University, Bodo Lang, says although Zuru's motivation is to protect its reputation, going to court could be seen as a storm in a teacup.
There's only 6 comments on the platform, and their average rating is still 4.3 out of 5. So, you could argue and say, look, this is just a storm in a teacup. But in some ways, they've done more damage by going to court.
Bodo Lang says no company can expect to receive only positive reviews from former employees. Auckland Council insists its tourism organisation provides indirect benefits for accommodation in the city. The council is in the Supreme Court fighting to overturn a Court of Appeal ruling that its hotel bed tax is invalid. It was introduced in 2017 as a way of raising about $13.5 million to help fund the council's tourism unit. One of Auckland Council's lawyers, Jania Bajent, claims the tourism organisation only receives 10% of the funding it attracts. She says the tourism unit contributes to the visitor economy in ways that are hard to quantify. In sport, there'll be no more motorsport at Auckland's Pukekohe Park from April next year. The move is to make way to develop the grounds for gallops by Auckland thoroughbred racing. Opened in 1963, Pukekohe has hosted some of Formula One's greats, including Bruce McLaren, Stirling Moss, Jackie Stewart and Graham Hill. Former Supercars star driver Greg Murphy says the news is still sinking in.
It's tough to think that it's not going to be there anymore. We've got a huge population of motorsport enthusiasts and petrol heads in this country, and Pukekohe is synonymous with the sport, and I think a lot of people are going to be really saddened by the fact they're not going to be able to go there, sit on the hill and watch motorsport.
Ireland prop Andrew Porter won't be punished further for the high tackle on Brodie Retallick in the third test that left the All Blacks lock with a fractured cheekbone. Porter was shown a yellow card and cited during Ireland's 32-22 win. A judicial committee has agreed with referee Wayne Barnes that Porter's tackle didn't meet the red card threshold. New Zealand fans were upset at the apparent double standard as All Blacks prop Angus Ta'avo had been shown a red card in the second test for a similar high challenge on an Irish player and banned for 3 weeks. To add insult to injury, Retallick will be out for up to 2 months and will miss the Rugby Championship. And former US President Donald Trump is urging players to take the money and join the Saudi-backed Live Golf Series. Trump, whose course in New Jersey will host the next Live event at the end of the month, suggests those who remain loyal to the PGA Tour will ultimately pay a bigger price for staying put. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Head of Psychology at University of Canterbury, Professor Don Hine, gives us a crash course on the psychology behind environmental campaigns like Plastic Free July. And I chat to Reverend Frank Ritchie about the new season of the podcast Recovering, where he sits down with a top New Zealand journalist to unpack the one story from their career that has most impacted them personally and professionally. That's Nights with me, Karen Hay, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Whanganui, also for Coromandel, showers, some thunderstorms are possible today, easing tomorrow. For the Bay of Plenty and for Taupo, rains easing to a few showers this afternoon and then clearing tomorrow. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain today, then showers, southerlies rising to gale winds tomorrow. From Taihape to Wellington, including Wairarapa, occasional rain. Snow may affect higher roads tomorrow. Severe southwesterly gales in Wellington and Wairarapa tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, occasional rain with thunderstorms possible for Bulla and for northwest Tasman today, becoming fine tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, occasional rain, heavy for a time overnight with snow above 300 metres, gradually easing to a few coastal showers tomorrow with gale southwesterlies. Fiordland, Southland and Otago, a few showers, mainly south of Dunedin. Fine about the fjords. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, periods of rain from tonight. It's 10 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Records have tumbled in Europe as countries across the continent experience scorching temperatures. Firefighters have been battling blazes and tens of thousands have had to evacuate. And people in several countries have been dying of heat stroke. The UK, normally used to milder climates, saw temperatures of more than 40 degrees for the first time. The BBC's Justin Rowlett reports.
With today's searing heat came fires, and lots of them. Huge plumes of smoke rose above London as grass fires engulfed homes on the outskirts of the capital. The London Fire Brigade declared a major incident.
A number of the calls that we've been dealing with today have been wildfires or grass fires in particular, where the ground has been tinderbox dry as a result of the weather that we've experienced over the last week, but in particular the last 2 days.
Temperature records were tumbling before midday today. The 39.1 degrees recorded at Charlwood near Gatwick Airport was a warning of what was to come. Within an hour, another record had been set at another airport, 40.2 degrees Celsius at Heathrow. By mid-afternoon, we got a new provisional heat record for the UK when Coningsby in Lincolnshire reached 40.3 degrees Celsius. And there was a new provisional record for Scotland too, incinerating the previous record.
We've been beating records by 1.5, 2 degrees, and really quite an extensive region of over 35 degrees. And this is really unusual. These are high temperatures over a broad area in England, so quite surprising.
In 1976, it peaked just shy of 36 degrees. It was 27 years before that record was broken. 16 years after that, it hit 38.7 Celsius. Just 3 years later, and we've got today's new record. Who would have thought over 40 degrees in the UK? And it isn't just getting hotter. Years ago, temperatures would only reach peaks like this in the far south. These high temperatures are moving north and west across the country. The heat is getting more intense and it is spreading. And, say climate scientists, we need to prepare for more record temperatures in the coming years.
The first thing organisations can do is make sure their heatwave plans are suitable, they're fit for purpose, and they're going to work when the next heat wave kicks in. And as individuals, I think we can recognise that heat waves are not fun things to enjoy. They can be really damaging and they can really affect our health.
It was certainly too hot for most tourists in Cambridge today. Those brave enough to take to the river brought their own shelter, and they needed it. The only sensible place to be was in the shade, and that says something important about our changing world.
This really ought to be a critical warning for everyone in this country, but especially our policymakers, that climate change is not something to be ignored. It's a really critical issue that we have to address as a country and as a world.
Some people did find ways to cool down. 3, 2, 1. But the message from climate scientists is clear. If we want to stop Britain and the world getting even hotter, we need to start cutting emissions, and quickly.
Meanwhile, in France, fire crews in the southwest are still battling blazes spreading along the Atlantic coast. Tens of thousands have been forced out of their homes. The BBC's Lucy Williamson reports from one of the affected areas.
In Testebush, we drove towards the fire, following fire crews as they disappeared into the smoke. All around us, the forest still smouldered, waiting for a chance to reignite.
You can really taste and smell the smoke in the air here. Fire crews have been battling these fires for a week now, and while they're contained in parts, they're still not under control despite the drop in temperatures. You can see some of them still working over here. The key concern now is preventing any fresh fires from taking hold.
They talk about an apocalypse here. Last week, it was paradise. These campsites carry evidence of both. Holiday memories spat out by the flames. The guests evacuated last week.
It's heartbreaking for the locals, for the tourists who come here. It's upsetting. And of course, us firemen feel the same way. But it just makes us more determined to finish the job.
A short drive away, Rachel has been packed for days. Her husband's old camper van stashed with water.
And then we've got a couple of baskets, and then we're going to bring in
anything irreplaceable, packed into a bag.
You could actually taste the smoke in your mouth. It was really disconcerting, this acrid taste, and there was ash falling from the sky. This situation is really scary. It's something that is so out of our control, and heat waves are happening more and more. We are surrounded by forest, and it's really something that's made us ask the question, are we going to go back to England perhaps because of it? It's frightening.
It is 15 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The high-profile trial of Steve Bannon, the once powerful aide of Donald Trump, has begun in Washington, D.C. Prosecutors accuse the right-wing populist of ignoring a summons to give evidence to the committee investigating the Capitol riot. He's vowed to go medieval at the trial. CNN's Sarah Murray reports.
The trial got off to a little bit of a slow start today, but it certainly ended on a fiery note as Steve Bannon railed against the January 6th committee after a day of opening statements in the case. Steve Bannon's trial moving ahead, with the judge finally swearing in the jury and both sides making opening statements. The prosecutor arguing Bannon blocked Congress from getting information it needed about January 6th. Because it was a subpoena, Congress was entitled to the information it sought. It wasn't optional. It wasn't a request. It wasn't an invitation. It was mandatory, said prosecutor Amanda Vaughn, adding Bannon was warned in a letter that if he refused to comply, he could be criminally prosecuted. This is not a case of mistake, Vaughn said. The defendant didn't get the date wrong. He didn't get confused on where to go. He didn't get stuck on a broken-down Metro car. He just refused to follow the rules. Vaughn adding the defendant showed his contempt for U.S. Congress, U.S. government, and that he's guilty. The House Select Committee investigating the insurrection wanted to know about Bannon's interactions with Trump and his predictions ahead of January 6th.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen, okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in.
But after the Trump ally and former White House chief strategist defied a subpoena,
the J6 committee is totally irrelevant.
He was charged with criminal contempt of Congress.
So we're going to go on the offense on this and stand by.
He pleaded not guilty to 2 contempt charges and faces at least 30 days behind bars if convicted. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve Bannon, and he's innocent of these charges, Bannon attorney Evan Corcoran proclaimed in his opening statement, fleshing out Bannon's biography with tidbits about his service in the Navy and current podcast. Corcoran got to the heart of Bannon's defense, claiming lawyers were still negotiating about the subpoena, including the date. There was no ignoring the subpoena, the Bannon attorney argued. There will be no evidence showing that.
Bannon did nothing wrong.
Leaving court today, an impassioned Bannon took aim at committee chairman Benny Thompson, who just tested positive for COVID.
Have the guts and the courage to show up here and say exactly why it's a crime. Benny Thompson is a total, absolute disgrace.
Sri Lankans will tonight be following a major vote in Parliament to choose a new president. The previous one fled amid a popular uprising and the ransacking of his palace. Yet 2 of the contenders are closely associated with the ousted leader. The vote comes amid an unprecedented economic crisis affecting key industries. The BBC's Secunda Kumani reports.
The tea leaves picked here end up in cups across the world. These lush fields are home to Sri Lanka's biggest export, but they've been badly hit by this unprecedented economic crisis. Our leaders aren't bothered about providing us with the basic necessities, he says. They're the ones who have put us in debt by stealing dollars and spending them however they want. Right now, Sri Lanka is like a ship stranded at sea. Across Sri Lanka, there are huge queues waiting for fuel, with much of the country grinding to a halt. Anger on the streets has already led to the ousting of the president. In factories, there's frustration. Tea exports bring in dollars vital in keeping the economy afloat, but production has been falling.
Tea has been grown and produced in Sri Lanka for the past 150 years. The industry employs more than 2 million people and normally brings in more than $1 billion every year. Right now, though, like the rest of the island, it's facing its biggest ever crisis.
At this factory, like many others, they've cut back on operating times and are worried about what the future holds.
Without the fuel, we are finding very, very difficult. If this goes on, we might have to shut down all factories. Normally, about 20 lorries are running for us. Now we are running about 8 lorries. And with the power cut, there are factories closed down, working 3 days, 4 days a week.
It's the poorest who are suffering the most right now. Tea pluckers struggle hard all day for little more than the minimum wage. But food prices are soaring.
We don't eat lunch anymore. We eat once at around 10 in the morning and then again in the evening.
For now, life looks likely to get even harder for Sri Lankans, whoever ends up leading their country.
Officials in rural Australia are coming up with innovative ways to ease housing shortages. 2 ideas are relocating empty homes from mining towns and repurposing government buildings. The ABC's Erin Park has more.
It's a wintry morning on the scenic southern coast of New South Wales, and resident Louise is braving the beach for a walk. But the area is eerily quiet, she says, mainly due to empty holiday homes.
The house next door to me is a holiday property and they haven't been there in more than a year.
It's a tense topic here in the Shire of Eurobodalla, with the latest data showing that in some towns more than half of homes were unoccupied on census night in the midst of an unprecedented housing shortage. Eurobodalla Mayor Matthew Hatcher says it's a stressful situation.
We've got so many working homeless in the area, people who have jobs, might have 2 kids in school, but are currently sleeping in their car because there's just nowhere to rent.
So last month, the Shire took the unusual step of writing to 8,000 out-of-town holiday home owners, asking them to put their homes on the rental market. And it's resulted in dozens of extra properties being made available.
Overwhelmingly, we've had an amazing response And it is heartwarming to see that sometimes all it takes is the ask.
It's a rare success story in what's a bleak picture of mismatched housing supply and demand across Australia. And a breakdown of the recently released census data shows the nation's 1 million empty homes are clustered in some unexpected places. While the highest rates were in trendy coastal tourist towns, the local government areas with the highest rates of underutilised housing stock were in less sought-after inland locations, clustered in seasonal or declining farming communities or boom and bust mining towns. Among them is the Shire of Dundas in remote Western Australia. Shire President Lorraine Bonza says homes emptied out when the local mine went into care and maintenance.
You can definitely see empty houses. Quite a few of them are actually older style houses, but definitely family sort of houses, be they ever so humble.
So could the empty homes be matched with the thousands of Australians currently facing homelessness? Some have suggested the unused mining housing stock could be trucked to areas of high need, something property analyst Louis Christopher says would be rarely viable.
It's really generally not the dwelling of choice. So it can be done, but it's probably not an optimal solution in my view.
Local councils say they're getting desperate. Some are hiring mobile shower and laundry units to support families having to live in tents. Others trying to repurpose government buildings as accommodation.
It's a massive issue. I think that we're in desperate need of national leadership.
Libby Stapleton is Mayor of the Surf Coast Shire in Victoria, where in spots like Lorne, more than 2/3 of homes are untenanted. She says while taxation reform is a sensitive subject, it's time that every option is put on the table.
We need to relook at what housing is for, who has access to it, and what impact it has on our livability as not just coastal communities, but as a nation.
Netflix lost nearly 1 million subscribers from April to June. That's far less than the company predicted, but still a major setback for what once seemed an unstoppable force in the entertainment industry. The BBC's James Clayton has more.
If you're old enough, you'll remember this. Going to an actual physical shop and renting out DVDs. How quaint. Companies like Blockbusters died because of the growth of an upstart, Netflix. First, you could order DVDs online, but in 2007, it started offering something very different, streaming content. The model was wildly successful. Netflix was a phenomenon, TV was dead, it was all about subscriptions. Well, not quite.
Netflix was the big disruptor in the category, and what it's facing right now is it's facing disruption itself.
Here in Silicon Valley, Netflix has just released its new audience figures for the last quarter, and they're not especially good. They lost 1 million subscribers in the last 3 months. So what's gone wrong?
For one, there is simply loads of competition. Disney+, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Apple TV, to name but a few. And that competition has created a brutal spending war. The top 8 streamers are predicted to spend more than $100 billion on content this year. Netflix has come up with some monster hits in recent times. Think Squid Games, The Crown. And Netflix Productions were nominated for 27 Oscars this year. The company is still making good content.
But the cost of living crisis has led to belt-tightening, with families across the world looking at streaming services as a potential saving.
Many other households don't have a Netflix account at all, but share the login of friends or family. One study found that Netflix was losing $25 billion a year from people watching Netflix on someone else's account.
But Netflix has known about this problem for years and hasn't been able to stop it from happening. Instead, Netflix is now looking at adverts as a potential solution.
Our research shows, we did a survey in May amongst Netflix subscribers, about 9% of UK online adults who don't currently subscribe to Netflix indicated that they would consider subscribing to Netflix if it offered a cheaper ad-supported tier.
Netflix knows that to survive, it has to change. If not, one day it could be another Blockbusters.
The British rock band Queen has set a new British record by becoming the first music group to sell 7 million copies of an album. It's been nearly 50 years since Queen and its lead singer Freddie Mercury released its first record, and decades later the group is still hot property. The BBC's Colin Patterson reports.
Is this the real life?
Queen's greatest hits, the soundtrack to many, many a family car journey for more than 40 years. A running order so familiar that when one track finishes, it's easy to sing the next intro before it even begins.
I've paid my dues.
And now it's the first album to sell more than 7 million copies in the UK, putting it almost a million ahead of ABBA Gold. Both these albums are currently still in the top 20 of the albums chart, and there's a reason for this. Streams of artists' most popular songs count towards sales of their biggest compilation, even if someone is listening to them on a playlist or as an individual track, and not that particular album. As a result, Old Greatest Hits by Fleetwood Mac, Oasis, and Elton John
It's a little bit funny.
are all in the top 20 best-selling albums of this year. Sir Elton John has described the situation as depressing, saying that he is the reason emerging acts like Sharon Van Etten and Angel Olsen don't make the charts.
Okay, before we head off, some more of your feedback. A lot of you getting in touch about this interview with Andrew King from the Property Investors. Not many of you happy with him. Paul says, I feel pretty sick listening to Andrew King making excuses for lazy cheapskate landlords. The legislation is there and tenants feel hamstrung and extremely vulnerable when trying to get properties upgraded to the performance level required. Almost all of them are in the same vein. What a disappointment to hear the Property Investors Chief. He showed a complete lack of respect for the rights of tenants, even suggesting they might pay a little more. Landlords providing cold, damp, mouldy rentals are plain money hungry and shouldn't be in business. This one disgusted by the Property Investors President's comments. I've been a landlord for 22 years and accept it's the landlord's responsibility and obligation to provide a healthy home to renters. Someone comments, there's no need for a licence to be a landlord. You need a licence to practice medicine, to drive a car and to sell food, but not to be a landlord. Now, the Lake News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from First Up at 5 a.m. They're going to talk to Finance Minister Grant Robertson and ask, when will it stop feeling like there is a hole in our pockets? Do tune in for that one, 5 a.m.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko iwi Ashton tēnei. It's hoped that up to 200 holidaymakers stranded by the flood-damaged road at Lake Ohau village will be able to leave by the weekend. The Prime Minister has told a conference that any further changes to local government will only happen if councils request it. Cook Strait ferry passengers could be in for a rough ride tomorrow with severe weather forecast for Wellington, including heavy swells. And the UN is warning that there'll be more severe heat waves in the future as the UK swelters in temperatures above 40 degrees. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Creative powerhouse Jon Batiste is a 5-time Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter and the music director on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. This evening, he performs his brand new work for piano and orchestra, I Can, in Carnegie Hall Live, this evening from 8 on RNZ Concert.